Appreciate you sharing a little bit. I'm going to share four points of why I think it's important, and if you have other things to add, maybe we can have a couple of you share that. Number one, we can grow in our faith by learning how other Christians have lived out their faith. I was just sharing with Chris Hampton that one of the reasons I like church history is because it's like a reality show. I mean, you get to see how people over the years have really lived out the teachings of Jesus, or not lived out the teachings of Jesus in many cases. And number two, we can humbly see that even great Christians make mistakes. We can learn from those errors and seek to mature in Christ. Again, I love church history because I really struggle interpreting the Bible. I really struggle in my relationship with Christ. And for me, it's nice to know that there's been other people way before me that have struggled with the relationship with God, and also struggled trying to figure out who Jesus is and the big questions about the problem of evil. Like, how do we believe in a God who loves this world, yet there's evil existing? And it's nice to be with others who have gone through that and to tackle like that. There's, I think, some historian that said, in times like these, it's good to remember that there's always been times like these. And that's helpful for me. Number three, we can avoid chronological, geographical, and denominational snobbery. We're part of Christ's church throughout the ages and throughout the world. Growing up in Texas, I thought Texas was the center of the universe. And I don't know if you know that much about Texans, but we sort of think that the world revolves around Texas. And I think when we sort of get introduced to Christianity, we get part of a church, we start to think that the church is just our little local gathering of folks. But studying church history helps open up your perspective to Christians all over the world and all over times, and that we are really one body. And so you don't want to be a snob about, I believe this and this is what's true and so forth. And so I have a little cartoon from Peanuts, church history. When writing about church history, you have to go back to the very beginning. Our pastor was born in 1930. So again, being a snob about your own tradition. And then fourth, if we truly believe that Jesus is risen, we can learn about what Jesus has been doing in the last 2,000 years. Jesus is still alive and working in and through the church. The defining characteristic of the Christian and Jewish faith is the recognition of God working in history. That history does not stop in the year 95 AD. And so, again, it's really cool to think that Jesus isn't just active in the New Testament. He's been active in the last 2,000 years, and to learn what he's doing really encourages me. So those are the four things that I thought of. Anybody else have any other thing to add to why it might be important to study church history? So let's see if we can get a couple hands and then we'll move on. Yes?
It helps us understand why we have the theology we have today. For example, the Trinity, the word's not even in the Bible. How did we get that concept,
Yes, very good. It helps us understand what we believe, where it came from. Yeah. Okay, one other, and then we'll get to move on. Yes?
Maybe it'll help us into our church the way that we worship, the way we do it.
Yes, yeah, you'll get to discover how worship evolved. Because worship, if you go to any church today, the church didn't always worship in that style. Even in the Greek Orthodox Church, things have changed a little bit. Okay, so this next slide I want to share with you. Question, like, how many Christians are there in the world today? I think there's 7.2 billion people in the world. How many of those would sort of define themselves as Christians? Any guess? Yes?
Isn't it 2.1 billion?
Yeah, 2.1, 2.2 billion. Yeah, very, very good. So about a third, or maybe more than a third. And this is sort of, I think, from 2005 of how they're sort of spread out throughout the world. And what do you notice about where Christians are in this world? Do you see here? Yeah. Yes, yeah, South America has the most. What's really interesting lately is Christianity has been growing the fastest in the southern hemisphere. And, sometimes, again, as sort of being chronological snobbery or geographical snobbery, is we as Americans, we often think that, we are the great missionaries and stuff, and we did have wonderful missionary experiences, but right now, churches in Africa and churches in South America are really going out and evangelizing the world. I'm part of the Presbyterian Church. The largest Presbyterian church in the world is in Seoul, South Korea. It has, I think, now has like 100,000 members in one church building. And so when I went to school at Princeton Seminary, we had a lot of students from India. The Presbyterian Church is growing a lot in India. And so the church in Europe, it's shrinking right now. Compared to other religions, like Christians have 2 billion people, Muslims have 1 billion right now. It's projected in the year 2070, about 50 years from now, that Muslims and Christians will equalize, that we'll both have probably 3 billion or something together. So Islam is growing at a faster rate right now. On this, I used to have this big blinking dot here. And what I find so amazing about the story of Christianity is it all started right here. And what city is that? Or what area? Obviously, yeah, Jerusalem, Israel area. And just for it to spread across the world, I think is amazing. And noticing, look at the map, how it's interesting, the location here. It's right where Africa and Asia and Europe connect. I mean, God picked a perfect location to get things started. Okay, so what I want to do is, before we get to all that Facebook post, I'm going to spend maybe 10 minutes summarizing kind of where we got, where the church came from before we get to the year 0. So I want to just hit this in your old. Did y'all do Old Testament already last night?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know this. So King David was around 1000 BC, and it's and then you had the Assyrian Empire around 721. That was sort of they conquered northern Israel, and then you had the Babylonian Empire in 586, and you had the exile. And this is when all the Psalms and things were written, and a lot of the Bible organized. And I'm sorry if you're taking notes and I'm zooming past it, because this is not a lecture here, the Old Testament. And then you had King Cyrus from Persia came and released the exiles, and they got to come back home. And then you had Alexander the Great, and he's very influential in terms of the New Testament, because he brought the Greek culture to the whole Mediterranean world, and that's why the New Testament is written in Greek. And he also brought in a lot of commerce and the ability to the cultures to mix and travel together. And then that's Julius Caesar, and the Roman Empire came around the year 44 BC into the area of Palestine. And again, they brought their culture with them. And then I am going to kind of summarize the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm going to really zoom through this. But after Alexander the Great died, the empire was divided, and there he goes. And Antiochus IV took control of the temple and plundered the temple, and then I'm going to really zoom through all this. Okay. I do like to point out that Hanukkah is in the year 164, if you haven't heard about that. Oh, maybe I can send all this to Steve if anybody wants to copy this PowerPoint presentation. Let's see what we have here. Oh, that's going to be hard to read. So basically, one thing I want to point out is from 167 to 63 BC, the Jewish people finally had independence. They've been conquered by all these empires, and they did have a period of independence. But once you're independent and you're not fighting other empires, you start to fight amongst yourselves. And you'll see that in the church as well, that you'll start to fight amongst yourselves, and even even with your college roommate. You're finally independent from your parents, you live with your college roommate, and it's great for 2 weeks, and then you start fighting about things. So that happened with there, and then you see the different denominations or sects happen even within the Jewish population, so Essenes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, etc. Okay, and what I find interesting is they had a civil war from 94 to 88 BC, and 50,000 Jews were killed, and 800 Pharisees were crucified. We often think that Jesus is the only one that was tortured and had this horrible death and crucifixion. But again, he just was crucified the way that normal criminals are crucified. And to me, it gives me a healthy perspective to know that, something happened horribly to other people, and Jesus being crucified is not to say, hey, I went through this horrible thing, nobody else has done that, but it's, hey, I'm suffering with you, I know what you're going through. And just to imagine these 800 Pharisee leaders being crucified and watching their wives and children killed in front of them, to me, I just cannot fathom that. And let's see, so once they're fighting it with each other, this is a great opportunity for Rome to come in and bring some order. So Pompey comes. And what's interesting is that they get these Jews and they bring them and spread them throughout the Roman Empire. And you have now pockets of Judaism throughout Rome, throughout the Roman Empire, and that'll allow the Christian church to have some connections when they're traveling. So I guess with the terror of having to be taken away as a slave actually ended up being a way that the church could grow later on. I'm going to fast forward through this. You've heard of King Herod. Jesus was born around 5 or 4 BC. Historians debate that. Sorry. Let's see. Jesus preached around year 27 to 30, and he was crucified. He died and rose again. 10 days later, 40 days, he walked around the earth after the resurrection, and then ascended into heaven. And 10 days later, Pentecost, and that's historically when the church was born. And then I'm going to go through all this. Stephen was martyred. And then you have Paul. He was persecuting the Christians, and then he was converted to become a Christian. And I'm going to slow down when we get to the other slides. One thing that's interesting, there's an emperor named Claudius, and we have historical writings that's non-biblical about that Christians are actually existing. And so he talks about there being some fighting about a guy named Chrestus. We assume that's Christ. And so Claudius expels Jews from Rome. And so what we'll find out later, that a lot of these Jews that were kicked out from Rome for fighting about Jesus moved to the Greece area, and you'll have the first clergy couple, Priscilla and Aquila, and I'm a clergy couple, my wife's a pastor. And since they were kicked out of Rome, Paul met with them in Greece, they started a church in Greece, and then when there's another emperor that allowed them to go back home to Rome, Priscilla and Aquila were able to start a new church back with the people they knew in Rome. So sometimes when you get kicked out of places, God can bless you with the relationships that are built in other places. Okay, so the church ends with Paul wanting to go, get into Rome. He's arrested, and he's still wanting to go to Spain, and it just ends. It doesn't tell a story of Peter's death or Paul's death or any of the other deaths of the apostles except James, and we hear about Stephen dying. So what do we know about what happened next? It's through other writings of church folk. I am going to share with you one of my favorite books. This is a copy of Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History. This is written in 325, and I'll share this with you later. But Eusebius kind of wrote about what happened in between, what happened to the apostles, how each of the apostles died, and then what happened with all the persecutions all the way up to the year 325. And so this book is a very old book. It's made in 1833. I'd be happy to pass it around if you promise not to spill coffee on it, and if you promise just to open it like this one. But I love reading this because you can sort of see some other stories that you don't know about just by reading scripture. Okay, I'm going to summarize real quick just to get to your head and where things are. And your New Testament guy will do that. So Jesus born in 6, you have Pentecost in 30, conversion of Paul in 35, Council of Jerusalem. Anybody know what the Council of Jerusalem was? Okay, that's when you had the debate about whether to welcome Gentiles or Greek people who were not circumcised. So should people who didn't grow up being a Jew, should they become a Jew first before they become a Christian? And they decided, no, you do not have to become a Jew first. And that really did change the future of the church. You'll learn this in your New Testament lecture, but Paul's letters are the oldest parts of the New Testament. It's believed the Gospels were written much later. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go through this really quick. You have 12 disciples, and I'd like to share a little bit about their story because you don't know about it just reading the Bible. You have to read Eusebius's history. And there's also a book from the Middle Ages called The Golden Legend that talks about all the disciples. Again, I'm going to zoom through this and I'm going to slow down with the post. Simon Peter, he was crucified under Nero upside down. And you can go to Rome. I've been to Rome, and you can see the prison where both Peter and Paul were held. It's called the Maritime Prison. And you can't see it very well in here. But basically, let's see, right here there's a hole and stuff. And so Peter and Paul would be held underneath the basement, and the guards would just drop food down that hole. And so you couldn't get out unless you had a ladder. So inside here, there's the hole there. And so this is their prison cell. And if you go to that prison, they'll actually have, they'll have like the chains, and it says that this Peter and Paul were in these chains. We don't know if it's true, but that's what they say. So I like that. Okay. A lot of people think that the Christians were killed in the Colosseum in Rome, but that didn't happen until much later. This is the Circus Maximus, and so this is where most of the Christians were killed in the early ages. Yes? Okay. Yeah, maybe. Okay. And then I'm going to share with Andrew. He was crucified in X-shaped cross. And he's got an interesting story that his body was taken to Scotland. That's why Scottish people like seeing Andrew a lot. And again, you'll get this PowerPoint sometime from Steve. Like James, is the city of Santiago is named after St. James. James, his legend is that he went to Spain and spread the message there. And that's why a lot of Spanish people like St. James, and Santiago is named after him. John is the only one that died of old age to the year 100. And Philip, one of the things I like about Philip is he had 4 daughters who were preachers. And there's different denominations that say women shouldn't preach, but of course you have the women at the tomb were the first ones called to preach the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus is risen. And so if Jesus thinks the women are good enough to preach the gospel, I think so too. But Philip, his 4 daughters in the Bible were preachers. And so I think that's neat to say. I'm going to skip him. Bartholomew, Nathaniel, the same person. If you go into St. Peter's Basilica, there's a painting of Nathaniel holding his skin. It's said that he was skinned alive, and so I think that's kind of fascinating. Matthew, we don't know too much about his traditions later on. Jude Thaddeus was killed by clubs. Simon the Zealot is sawed in half this way. You'd think they saw him this way, but they saw him this way. I don't know. And he went to Persia, according to legend. Thomas, okay, I love the story about Thomas. Thomas the legend was that he went to India to share the gospel, and one of the things that he met this king named Godofrees, and he heard that Thomas was this follower of a great carpenter, and so he said, awesome, can you build me a really magnificent house and palace? And so Thomas ended up, and so the king gave Thomas money, and Thomas gave the money all to the poor. And the king's like, well, where's my palace that you're supposed to build? I thought you followed this carpenter. And he said, I built it in heaven. I gave the money away. And so he got really upset, and then the king had a dream about his brother saying, oh yes, you have this beautiful palace in heaven. So Thomas is good, keep him alive. But anyhow, scholars had doubted this whole story as legend, because if you go through archaeology, nobody had ever heard of King Godofrees III or whatever during Thomas' age. And I think about 50 years ago, they found a bunch of coins in India with King Godofrees' image, and it's all dated to the time of Thomas. And so it's just really exciting to confirm that maybe this story is actually true. So I like that story. And when I went to seminary at Princeton, again, we had a lot of students from India. They were very adamant, insisting that their church began with Thomas. And so the legend spread for thousands of years that Thomas founded the church in India. You know about Judas Iscariot. The last thing I want to share about the disciples is why it's important to know their stories is most of them, except for John, died because of what they believed about Jesus. And to me, one of the best proofs of Jesus' resurrection is that these folks were willing to die for something. If they made the whole thing up, then maybe they wouldn't have died. So that helps me to know their story, that perhaps this thing is really true. Okay, I'm going to move into the persecution of the Christians after that. And a lot of people think the persecution of Christians was constant for the first 300 years, and it wasn't. At first it was local and spotty and just kind of little mob stuff, and then later on it's just this general acknowledgement that Christians were bad people, and every once in a while they'd kill them. But it really didn't become systematic until the last 50 years or so. Why were Christians persecuted? One, atheism. All these reasons are going to be surprising. So why do you think they were accused of being atheists?
They didn't believe in the gods of the...
Yeah, all the Greek and Roman gods. Yeah, so they didn't believe in all that. So they're atheists. Cannibals. Why do you think Christians were thought to be cannibals?
Misunderstanding of communion.
Yes, eating the body and blood of Jesus. Yes, so they thought they were cannibals. Sexual orgies. What about, why do you think they'd have this misunderstanding that Christians were just partying it up and having these sexual orgies?
Because they would have love feasts.
Very good, a lot of feasts. Yeah, so again, they were misunderstood with that. Unpatriotic, worshipped a crucified Roman criminal. I mean, this is a group that's worshiping a criminal. I'm going to show you the very first picture of Jesus being crucified that we ever have in the history of the world. And this is some graffiti in Rome. And this, I forgot where it's found, but I'll clarify it here. And what you actually have is a man with the head of a donkey, and it says that Alexandros is worshiping his god. And so Christians were made fun of here in this graffiti that they're worshiping this criminal and stuff. And so this is the very first depiction of, in a satire of Jesus being crucified. In the year 155, Tacitus said Christians are a class of people loathed for their vices. And we'll read a little bit more about the fire that Nero blamed them on. So that was the Romans' understanding of who the Christians were. And so I want to share with you this beautiful letter that you might never heard of before that shares what the Christians' perspective of who they were. That was written in the year 130. And so somebody here who is Thetis, you're going to be our first reader.
I knew I was going to.
Okay, yes, because there is a number 1 next to your name. Either Mephaetus or Mephaetes. I'm going to mispronounce things a lot, so it's okay if you mispronounce it. So, okay.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mephaetus, which is the Greek word of disciple. Disciple, I'm sorry, disciple. And on my Facebook page, I posted a picture of this guy holding up a sign, shouts and defense. You see, I wrote a letter in the year of 130 that described who Christians are. It defends the faith by clarifying against popular rumors that we don't eat our babies and we don't have these huge sexual orgies. I wanted to defend Christians from those false accusations and misunderstandings. I promise we are normal people.
All right, thank you very much. So, Christians as cannibals, they imagined that they were eating their babies for communion. Was the thing. And so this is a beautiful letter, and I'm going to let you read this silently in your head because I think it's really pretty. You can read it. All right, anyhow, I think that's just really beautiful. And I wish that was in our Bible, but it's written in year 130, and they tended to like first century text to be in the Bible. But again, it's something that this could be used as a, parts of it could be used as an affirmation of faith in a worship service today. That that we live in the world, that we're part of the citizens of heaven. So. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the emperors of Rome, give you a context of where some of these characters in church history existed or lived under. So Augustus was emperor when Jesus was born. And then you have Tiberius, who was emperor when Jesus did his ministry. And then Caligula was followed after him, and Claudius is the one that we heard of who had these Jewish groups fighting in Rome about a guy named Chrestus, and he expelled them. But he was also kind of interesting. He was murdered by his wife, and so that their son Nero could take the throne. I'm sure you've heard of Nero. Nero took the throne when he was 16 years old. He was crazy. He'd get drunk and sing really badly to the Roman Senate. I love that story. And in the year 64, he burned Rome to the ground, and people blamed Nero because he wanted to rebuild the city. But he accused the Christians of setting the fire. And so Peter and Paul were executed probably during the reign of Nero, and partly because him blaming the Christians for the fire that he himself set. But there is some debate historically about that perspective. So Mark was probably written during the time of Nero as well. Okay, so Tacitus, whoever's Tacitus is going to share a little bit about what Nero did. Okay, let's see.
Hi, I'm Tacitus. I am a Roman senator who wrote about the history of the emperors. And on my Facebook page, I posted a picture of Nero playing the fiddle while Rome is burning. I mean, this guy was crazy. He didn't like the way Rome was laid out. So he had the city burned. And he blamed the people in this new religion called Christianity. And during this whole event, while his city burned, Nero was throwing parties and playing the fiddle. I could not believe what I saw. It was horrible what he did to those Christians.
All right, thank you very much. Good reflections. We're not going to have to read this, but I do want to point out some of what Tacitus said about how they were put to death. He said they arrested them for the charge of arson as for their hatred of the human race, because they thought Christians just hated the human race because they didn't participate in all these cultural festivities and they're unpatriotic and ate babies, etc. So they were put to death as objects of amusement. They were clothed in hides of beasts and torn to death by dogs. Others were crucified. Others were set fire to illuminate the night after sunset. Nero threw open his grounds to display and put the show as a circus where he mingled with the people, dressed like a charioteer and riding about his chariot. And all this gave rise to a feeling of pity. It's interesting that he starts to have sympathy for what the Christians are going through, even towards these men who deserved the most exemplary punishment, since it was felt that they were being killed for the public, not for the public good, but to gratify the cruelty of an individual. So, you know, the Romans are starting to sort of think, oh, who are these Christians? And, you know, are they really that bad? Again, this is one of those pictures of the Christians sort of being lit up as in flames of fire. Vespasian, we'll skip him. Titus is interesting because, okay, that's the 24-minute warning. Okay. If you go to Rome, anybody been to Rome and seen the Arch of Titus? There's something really interesting historically about that. You'll see in the Arch of Titus, it commemorates them going and plundering the temple. And Titus, before Titus was emperor, he was the general of the Roman army. So in the year 70, he went and plundered the temple in Rome and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and it's never been rebuilt. But here they took all the gold, and you can see a menorah here, a Jewish menorah. And they took all the gold there, and what they ended up building with that, sorry, this is a picture of me here. They built the Colosseum with all the money and the gold that they sold from the temple. And so it's interesting, the temple, the proceeds came to be used as a Colosseum, which later had some persecutions of Christians in there. And we're going to talk about the Colosseum later. You'll hear about it even later at the time of Martin Luther, with how that money trickled down to something else. Okay, Domitian persecuted a lot of people for atheism. And this is the time of when the Gospels, Matthew, Luke, John, and Revelation were going on. This sort of gives you an image of what Rome looked like around the year 100 when the Gospels were written, and Paul's left a few years after Paul's letter. This is the Colosseum later. This is the circus. This is where most of the Christians were killed early on. Okay, this is another interesting non-biblical letters that we have about Christians. It comes from Pliny. Pliny is here, and I guess he's writing letters to the emperor, and he's asking about, he's sharing what his procedure for dealing with Christians are. And so he wrote a letter to the emperor, and then the emperor wrote back. And so we have those, and you can read about them, it's fascinating. And so we have Pliny's ready to go to share her stuff. So let's see, what did I do for Pliny? Oh yeah, little mule.
Hi, my name is Pliny the Younger, and I posted on my Facebook page a picture of donkey. Because these Christians were as stubborn as mules, I would simply ask them to curse Christ, and they would not budge. Even under the threat of death, they would not worship the statue of the emperor. These Christians are really stubborn.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so the Christians were stubborn. We could read Pliny's letter. He talks about, I'd asked them 3 times if they're a Christian or not. And I'd say, if you say you're Christian, I'm going to cut off your head. And they still said, I'm Christian. And he's like, are you sure? And so, he's asking the emperor, should I really be doing this? And he's like, yes, you're handling it right. And then another word he uses is, that they're depraved and excessive superstition. He talks about even, these female slaves who are styled deaconesses are still, they're willing to die. And he's kind of shocked by that. Oh, another thing that's interesting, he says what they did is they ate food of an ordinary and innocent kind. So even there, they're still concerned, are they eating babies or not? And so he investigated, yes, they're eating regular food. Okay, Ignatius, under the governorship of Pliny the Younger, the bishop of Antioch, Ignatius, was martyred. I think we have an Ignatius person. And I like his story too.
Hi, I am Ignatius. On my Facebook page, I posted a picture of that Bible story in which a child was brought to Jesus and all the disciples got upset. But Jesus said, "Let the children come to me, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Guess what? I was that child who Jesus held in his arms. Isn't that cool? Pretty cute, right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when you read sort of Eusebius' history and other books in the early church, they talk about different characters in the New Testament that reappeared later. And so part of the legend is Ignatius was actually that little child that Jesus held. And so I think that's kind of neat. And so, okay, let's see. Ignatius wrote a lot of letters that we have that are not in the Bible, and they're written in around the year 107. And so they provide a lot of help for us to understand what was going on. And he's the first one to use the word Catholic, meaning universal. So that's where he's responsible for that. Okay, then Hadrian, he built the Pantheon and blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Okay, this guy killed Polycarp, so I want us to learn about Polycarp. Who's Polycarp? Let's see what you have here. Oh, yes.
So hi guys, my name is Polycarp and I was a student of the Apostle John. He lived to be about 100 years old. He was really old. I was lucky enough to get to know John really well, and the early church depended on me to decipher and to know his writings really well, and to know that they were authentic. So in honor of that, on my Facebook post, I posted a picture of the bathrooms at Princeton Seminary, where the stalls are labeled 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. If you understand this piece of humor, then there's really good news for you all. It means you're probably ready for seminary.
All right, very good. Good job. Good job. Yeah, so that's true. This isn't the actual picture of Princeton Seminary. But when at my bathrooms, I couldn't get it, so I did that. But yeah, I loved how the Johns are labeled that way. Okay. Let's see. Whoa. Polycarp, I like his story, is they were trying to kill him. The Roman guards had pity because he was a really old man by the time he died. And the executioners said, "We don't want to kill you, you're an old man, please just renounce Christ." And he said, Polycarp said, "For 86 years I've been his servant, and he's done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme the king who saved me?" And so he was burned alive. Marcus Aurelius, let's see, he killed a bunch of different people, or ordered that. I bring him up because Justin Martyr, he was executed during the reign of Marcus. And so we have a Justin Martyr person to share something that's significant about Justin here. And I'll get the picture here so you can see it.
Hi, I am Justin Martyr, Play-Doh. Don't you love Play-Doh? Do you remember when you were a kid in preschool playing Play-Doh and you thought you were so smart? Well, I am an expert on Plato. Of course, I am talking about the Greek philosopher Plato. And I started a school of philosophy for Christians in Rome. Now, I lived in the 2nd century, and a lot of people complained that Christianity was too new of a religion and said that it was, if only people who believed in Christ are saved, then What about the people who lived before Jesus, like my great-great-grandparents? Well, I have read the Bible and have done a lot of reading on Plato. Although Plato lived 400 years before Jesus, I think he was saved. I think Plato was a Christian and did not know it. So what do you think of that?
Very good, thank you. So, even today, we have people that wonder about Christianity, whether to accept it or not, and especially this understanding of having faith in Jesus, and that brings to salvation. People ask, what about those who've never heard of Jesus? What about those who lived before Jesus even existed? All these questions that we ask today have been asked in the early church, and so Justin Martyr, dealt with some of those questions. He lived in the 100s. That's not too far away, where people are familiar with the times before Jesus existed. So how do you handle those who died without even knowing Jesus? And so he helped answer that in his writings, and talked about these people could be Christians and be saved without even knowing or hearing the name Jesus. And he thought Plato and Aristotle and Socrates were Christians. Let's see. And so he did all that. Okay. Commodus, September. This guy killed a woman named Perpetua, and so somebody is Perpetua, and she is going to read her story.
Or his script.
Okay, yes, he is going to read her story.
Hi, my name is Perpetua, and now I like to post my diary on Facebook. It is pretty amazing to think that a young woman like me, who wrote something a year or two ago, can still be read after all these years. It is a sad story though, so be sure to bring a box of tissues when you read my diary, when you go to seminary and take Church History 101.
All right. So you'll probably read Perpetua's diary, and it is edited by a guy named Tertullian. But in her diary, she wrote it while she was in prison, and she gave birth to a child, and so she was constantly asked to renounce her faith and be a mother to her child, and she never did, and she willingly died. I think she was thrown to lions or something like that. So you'll read her story at seminary, so I want you to be familiar with who she is. Philip, he was a nice guy. So, yay, Philip. Okay. Decius started the first systematic-wide persecution, where it was illegal to be a Christian throughout the Roman Empire, and you actually had to carry sort of your papers. It's called a libellus, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I guess it's kind of like, imagine like immigration papers. You had to carry this constantly where you were saying that you had sacrificed to the gods. If you didn't have it and you weren't willing to make a sacrifice to the gods or bow to the emperor, then you would be killed. But he was killed 2 years or 3 years into his reign. So a lot of Christians thought, oh, back at you. It's interesting, Valerian said, Christians should not meet in cemeteries anymore. Again, y'all know about Christians meeting in house churches, but really most of the time that they met for worship, they were in cemeteries or in catacombs. Why do you think that they would meet there? That's what? No one would go there. It's kind of non-kosher, but also, the whole every Sunday for the early church and for us is a celebration of Easter. That's why we worship on Sundays, is because Jesus rose from the dead on Sundays. And cemetery is a great place to worship because every day we're celebrating the resurrection as well. But yes, it's a safe place. This is not where they meet. But that's an interesting thing to consider about. This is before big cathedrals were built. Cemeteries was a place of worship. Origen died during his reign, so somebody's going to read about a guy named Origen. So who do we have here? It breaks at 10:15, right? Timothy, we're on the right pace.
Hi, my name is Origin, and I have posted a picture of the Bible with the pages folded in the shape of a heart. I like this image because I see the love of Jesus everywhere in the Bible. I was one of the first Christian scholars to really look at the Hebrew Bible and describe each story as a metaphor for God's love in Jesus. I am considered the father of biblical interpretation. But to some people, I went too far when I talked about the love of God. I believe that God would eventually save everyone. And according to Basil the Great, this was what a majority of Christians believed during my lifetime. But 300 years after my death in the year 553, I was condemned as a heretic because of my writings about God's love bringing complete restoration to the universe.
And so Origen, he was well accepted because he was smart. He wrote the Hexapla. He translated the New Testament into Hebrew and the Old Testament into Greek. And then he had all of his commentary. We have a lot of his writings still today. And he also sort of interpreted the Bible not necessarily literally. He used allegory and metaphor, and he sort of invented this understanding called typology, where like in every Old Testament story he saw Jesus in it, and would sort of kind of take it out of historical context and say, this isn't really about the flood in Noah's Ark. This is about the church that Jesus started and stuff like that. And so he was kind of flexible with that. He also wrote against sort of pagan critics. He was tortured by Odysseus, and then 300 years after his death, he was condemned as a heretic about his teachings about universal salvation. He went so far to say that even the devil will eventually be saved by the grace of Christ. So, interesting character. This guy was nice. He lived for 40 years. I mentioned Claudius because St. Valentine died during here. And so all of y'all know St. Valentine's Day, so I want you to know a little bit about the legend of St. Valentine, so somebody's going to share that. So to give you context, St. Valentine died in the year 270. On February 14th? Okay, let's see what that.
Hi, I'm St. Valentine. I was a priest who served in the 3rd century in Rome. When Emperor Claudius II decided that single men made better soldiers than those with wives and families, he outlawed marriage for young men, his crop of potential soldiers. So I thought this was wrong. And I went ahead and performed marriages in secret. Claudius had me arrested and commanded me to renounce my faith or die. I refused, and instead I tried to convert Emperor Claudius to Christianity. This made him even more upset. He sent me to jail to be executed. While I was in prison, a miracle happened. I healed the blind daughter of my prison guard. This young lad and I became friends, and she prayed for me while I was in prison. On the evening before I was executed, I sent a letter to my new friend and the note read, "From your Valentine."
I love how St. Valentine's is one of the Christian holidays still celebrated in schools. So it's very public. It's not just for lovers, it's for friends. Great persecution happened in 295, and those are some great pictures. You're perfect on pace. Okay. Diocletian, he's the one that sort of, the great persecution started when he was emperor. And he saw that the empire was so big and sort of starting to get out of control, so he had 4 junior emperors that split it up. And this is, if you go to St. Mark's in Venice, you'll see this picture of the 4, I forgot what they're called, 4 junior emperors. And so they divided up Europe, ruling between them. And one of the, okay, so let me say. So yeah, Diocletian ruled one area, Constantine ruled the other, or Constantine's dad, and then later Constantine. And then you had Galerius, and then his general was Licinius, and then you had Maximin, and then his son Maxentius, about that way. Okay, so Diocletian, he didn't really care about the Christians, but Galerius really hated the Christians. And so Galerius and his general Licinius didn't like the Christians at all, so they did a lot of persecution. Maxentius, he didn't like Constantine. He called Constantine the son of a whore. All these people sort of came from rich families and so forth. But Constantine, his dad was a rich general in the army, but he married this waitress, this innkeeper in England named Helena. And she wasn't from sort of royalty or so forth, and so a lot of people kind of looked down on Constantine that his mother wasn't, upper class. Whoa. Okay. In 300, Gallius ordered all his soldiers to offer sacrifice or die. When Diocletian passed away, Gallius ordered the destruction of Christian places of worship, confiscation of scriptures, and the death of all Christians. Entire Christian communities were wiped out in Africa, Egypt, and Palestine. We'll come back to this confiscation of scriptures. A lot of the copies of the Bible and letters and stuff were destroyed during this time, so we're very fortunate that we have writings of the early Christians in the first place during this persecution. Okay, I want to show you a map here. So Diocletian had this territory, Galerius had this territory, Constantine had this territory, Maximian had this territory. So Diocletian died, Galerius took this area here, and then what we'll find out is that Constantine battled Maxentius in Rome at the Battle of the Mulvian Bridge, and eventually he defeated him. You'll hear that story. And then later on, he had to fight Licinius, and then once he beat him, the whole empire was united under Constantine. And so let's hear Constantine the Great's story. Let's see what we got here. There we go.
Hi, I am Constantine, and I have posted on my Facebook page a symbol of Jesus called the Chiro.
It's called the Chi.
Chiro, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
The Chiro. These are the two first letters in the Greek for Christ. I actually posted the symbol on the shields of all my soldiers on October 28th in the year 312. I met Maximus?
Yeah. Pirate Maxentius?
Yeah, Maxentius
Yes.
at the Battle of Mulvian Bridge. He had twice as many soldiers as me. The odds did not look good, but the night before I had a dream, and in the sky I saw the symbol of the cross in front of the Chiro arise from the light of the sun, and I heard a voice say, "With this sign you will conquer." I printed the sign on the shields of my soldiers, and I believe that by a miracle of God, we won the battle that day.
Very good. So that's the Kairos. This X is the Chi, CH, and then this P is the Greek word, the Greek letter Rho. So the first two letters of Christ. And so he painted it on his soldiers, and they won the battle against Maxentius at the Mulvian Bridge. There's the Mulvian Bridge. You can still see it today. Okay, I have another show and tell. We have 5 minutes left, and if you don't get through this show and tell, we can still keep it, but don't put this in your pocket. I have coins that are from that time period, so this is actually a 1700-year-old coin. This is a 1700-year-old coin. So this one has Constantine on it, and this one has Licinius on it, and so these are the two guys that fought each other. And you're welcome to take it out of the packet and look at it closer if you want, but just make sure I get it back. Okay. So he defeated Maxentius, and then he met Licinius, the other emperor of the East, and they signed the Edict of Milan, and that was this huge deal because it granted freedom of conscience and worship to all religions. So it didn't make Christianity the official state religion. He just gave freedom of religion to anybody. You could worship whatever God you wanted. And I think that's really cool. It didn't happen until, I think, the year 380 when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. That's when you had to be a Christian. But basically, at 313, anybody, you could worship any way you wanted. But then Licinius backtracked after the Edict of Milan, so it didn't really last in the East, and he started persecuting Christians. until they met in the Battle of Chrysopolis. So when you get the coins, these two guys fought each other in that year, and that's when he was defeated in the year 324. And so finally Constantine has this whole area, and all those people are defeated. And 1 year after that battle, when he finally has it, and he used this Christian symbol to win, he decided, hey, let's get Christianity organized, they're not going to be persecuted anymore. And they had the Council of Nicaea. They said, let's figure out who this Jesus is exactly. And there's several things that were significant about the Council of Nicaea and Constantine and what they gave to the churches. First of all, and it still takes place today in America, no taxes and free travel for clergy. I didn't get free travel, but there's no, for clergy, we don't get taxed on our housing. And so if you become a pastor, you don't get federal income tax on what you pay for your mortgage and any sort of yard keep expenses and so forth. The tax money given to the churches to distribute to the poor, well, you don't have that now, but that was the churches were in charge of all the social programs, and they'd get the tax money from the state to do that. All the churches that were destroyed were rebuilt. In Rome, 70 basilicas were built, including St. Peter's. Each Roman church was given 400 pounds of gold a year, so that really solves the stewardship campaigns. You don't have to, that would be awesome today. Bishops were given legal authority to free slaves and decide cases of law, so that pastors and priests could decide legal matters. Christians were given Sunday off, the soldiers. Public money was allocated to poor families so that no child goes hungry. This is like something that Constantine wanted to make sure was in there. Now, all religions are free to worship as they choose, but Christianity is the favored religion. Also, under Constantine, 50 Bibles were made under the direction of Eusebius. And so y'all have that book, Eusebius, somewhere? Okay, great. Yeah, so he also oversaw 50 Bibles being made. And one of the Bibles is still in existence, and that is Codex Sinaiticus. And maybe the New Testament will tell you the story of that, but I was fascinated that it was discovered in the late 1800s, and it is pretty much complete, one of Constantine's Bibles. Okay, we have no minutes, so we're going to stop there, and this is exactly the stopping point I wanted for the first half. All right?